Hello, my amazing children. This is Grandma Carla, and I am back with another chapter of Treasures of the Snow by Patricia St. John. We are on chapter 21, Out into the Blizzard. Once in his room, Lucian moved with great speed. There wasn't a minute to be lost. He unhitched his cloak from the cupboard and put on his woolly helmet that covered his ears. Then he wound his puttees around his legs and put on his stoutest boots. Then he wrote a note to his mother telling her he would not be back until morning. He tiptoed down the stairs into the kitchen and filled his pockets with bread and cheese and a box of matches. Then he quietly lifted the latch of the back door and crept across to the barn. The storm lantern hung on the wall, and Lucian lit it and was comforted by its steady ray. He wondered whether to take his skis, but decided it was too dark. He opened the far door of the barn and stepped out into the windy, snowy meadows, and the blizzard nearly buffeted him over. He was safely away. His great adventure had begun. If the wind was like this in the field, he wondered what it would be like on the pass. Surely he would be blown over and buried in the drifts. Well, he would see when he got there. In the meanwhile, he must think hard about reaching the old man. It was a relief to reach the woods. Here, although the trees shuddered and tossed their branches and made strange noises, he himself was sheltered, and the snow on the path was less deep than the snow in the meadows. He could move more easily and quickly without floundering. Up and on through the tossing trees until he could see a comforting orange glow of light in the old man's window. The end of the first stage of his journey was in sight. He braced himself to meet the wind as he came out in the open again, struggled to the old man's door, and knocked. "Who's there?" said the old man very cautiously. "Me, Lucian." The door was flung open instantly, and the old man drew him in. "Lucian, my boy," he cried, peering at him in astonishment. "Whatever brings you here in this weather at this time of night? What has happened?" Lucian, after his battle with the wind, sank down on a bench for a moment to regain his breath. He did not like asking the old man for his money, but nothing must stand in the way of his quest. "You once said," began Lucian, looking up into the old man's face, his eyes bright with anxiety, "that you had a lot of money to give to somebody if you really needed it. I found somebody who really needs it. If you will give me your money, I think little Danny Burnier's leg might be made better." "How could that be?" asked the old man, looking very attentively at the boy. "There's a doctor at the hotel where my sister works," explained Lucian, "who can cure lame people and heal broken bones. I'm going now to ask him to come and see Danny, but my sister says he would want a lot of money." "You're going now?" repeated the old man, "in this weather? You must be mad, boy. You could never cross the pass in this weather." "I think I could," replied Lucian doggedly. "The blizzard started only a few hours ago, and the fresh snow won't be deep yet, if I hurry. But it's no good going unless I've got the money." The old man did not answer for a minute. He seemed to be struggling with himself. "I would give it if I was sure of the man," he said doubtfully, "but I don't want to waste or lose it. How do I know that he is an honest man? What is his name, Lucian?" "His name is Monsieur Givet. My sister says he's a famous man." "Monsieur Givet?" The old man repeated the words softly in a strange voice, as though he thought he must have made a mistake about them. It seemed to Lucian that he had turned rather pale, but without another word he turned away, took a key from one of his own carved boxes, and opened a little cupboard in the wall behind his bed. From this he drew out an old sock stuffed with notes. "Take it all," he said, "and give it all to Monsieur Givet. Tell him it is all his if he will cure the child. Tell him, Lucian, that is the payment of a debt." His voice shook a little, and Lucian glanced at him in surprise, but he was too glad to wonder much. He had never seen so much money before in his life. He put the whole bundle inside his shirt, buttoned his coat and cloak over it, and made for the door. "Thank you very, very much," he said hastily at the door. "I'll come and tell you what happens." The old man came to the door to watch him go and held his lantern high to light the path. Lucian had gone only a few steps when the old man called to him loudly above the wind. "Lucian!" Lucian ran back. "Yes, monsieur?" "You won't forget the message, will you?" "No," replied Lucian carefully. "I am to say it's the payment of a debt." "I won't forget. Goodbye, monsieur." He was making off again into the night when the old man called him again. "Lucian!" The boy ran back, impatient at the delay. "Yes, monsieur?" "You won't tell him anything about me, will you? Don't tell him my name, will you, Lucian?" "I don't know your name," Lucian reminded him. "And don't tell him where I live, Lucian." "No, monsieur," Lucian answered him, too impatient to wonder. "I'll just say it's the payment of a debt. Goodbye, monsieur." He sped off as fast as he could through the deep, soft snow, afraid that the old man might call him again. At the margin of the wood, he turned and waved his lantern. Through the whirling snow, he could still see the dim figure of the old man against his open door. He must be very quick. The snow was still falling. Very soon the pass would be uncrossable, if it were not already so. He thought it probably would be uncrossable already on foot. He would go into the cowshed on the way down and get his skis. He stumbled his way over the last field, sinking in at every step. The cowshed was mercifully still unlocked, and Lucian stepped in with extreme caution. He had just lifted down his skis when the further door flung open and his mother and Marie came in, waving a lantern. Lucian propped his skis against the wall and fell flat on his face on the dirty floor behind the largest cow. "He's not here," said his mother, flashing her lantern around the shed, her voice sharp with anxiety. "I believe you're right, Marie. He's got some mad notion about getting to that doctor. He'll be floundering along that mountain road by now, and the stupid boy hasn't even taken his skis. I wonder whether he could persuade Monsieur Bernier to go after him and bring him back. He can't have gone far on foot." "I think we'd better," agreed Marie, and her voice sounded agitated too. "Monsieur Bernier will easily catch him on skis and stop him before he gets anywhere really dangerous. Let's go and ask him." They went off hastily, and Lucian jumped to his feet. There wasn't a moment to lose. It would take them 2 or 3 minutes to get on their coats and boots. In this weather, it would take them a quarter of an hour to reach the Bernier chalet. Another 10 minutes while they told their story, and while Monsieur Bernier collected his lantern and boots and skis. He had roughly about half an hour's start. It ought to be all right, but then he was only a light child, and Monsieur Bernier a heavy, skillful man who could ski much faster than Lucian. Very, very carefully, he crept from the shed, relit his lantern, which he had blown out when he heard the latch move, and fastened his skis. Stemming carefully, he started off, holding the lantern out in front of him, his head well down because the blizzard was blinding. Down over the meadows, and once again he reached the friendly shelter of the forest path where he could look in front of him. Out across the low fields, skirting the village, and here the wind was less furious, and Lucian could look straight ahead and go faster. He made his way through the deserted village, looking anxiously, lest anyone should see him and want to know his business. But everyone was indoors on such a night. Only there was a little wind in the valley hollow where the village nestled, and poor buffeted Lucian enjoyed the lull, and the lights in the chalet windows gave him courage. He crossed the silent market square with its frozen fountain and glided on downhill past the village dairy, past the station, and over the bridge that led across the river. And then he paused for a few minutes to get his breath, for he had reached the very lowest part of the valley, and now he must start climbing the other side, right up over the pass that ran between two mountains. He glanced back fearfully in case Monsieur Bernier should be following, but there was no one in sight. He suddenly felt terribly lonely and longed for the village with its dark chalets and warm orange windows. For a moment, he almost wished Monsieur Bernier would catch up with him, but he pushed away the thought and began his climb. The snow on the valley road was not too bad. Lucien shouldered his skis and found he could walk without too much difficulty. He could still hear the wind howling in the woods above him, but the blizzard seemed to be stopping. Once again, he plunged into the woods and climbed, weary and afraid. These were not the familiar woods of his own side of the mountain, but dark, strange woods. Lucien was not even sure if he was still on the right path, and if he wasn't, it might simply lead him to the foot of a precipice. Somewhere above the roaring wind, he could hear the angry rushing of a stream, and his skis seemed to get heavier and heavier. He climbed through the woods for 3 hours, his mind full of fears and horrors. Every story he had ever heard about the perils of the mountains crowded into his mind. Avalanches, treacherous drifts, breaking boughs. He thought of the St. Bernard dogs trained to rescue foundered travelers. Well, there were no dogs around here. He supposed he would just sink down. Unless, of course, he chose to go back. He stopped for a moment, wondering that the thought had occurred to him before. Had not occurred to him before. How simple to buckle on his skis and stem carefully down the zigzagging forest path and go home. I did my best, he would tell them, but I couldn't get through, and the Berniers would no doubt think it very heroic of him to even have tried. The wind was roaring horribly, and the great trees moaning loudly and tossing their arms, and he was nearly at the top of the forest now, out on the wild waste of that pass where the wind might pick him up and whirl him over the rocks like a snowflake. He found his teeth were chattering, and he was crying. I'm so frightened, he sobbed to himself. I can't go on. I know I'll be killed on the pass. I wish Monsieur Bernier would come. Then, as he stooped to buckle his skis, he suddenly remembered that warm, sheltered moment when he and Annette and Grandmother had sat around the stove together, and Grandmother had talked about being afraid. Perfect love casts out fear. If we really believe that Jesus loves us perfectly, there is nothing left to be afraid of. If he loves us perfectly, he will never let anything really harm us. Lucien paused, with his hands on the buckles, stopped by his thoughts. So he was not alone, after all. Grandmother had said that Jesus loved him perfectly, and if he loved perfectly, he would not leave a child alone in the darkness and danger. It was just as though someone stronger than the night, the wind, the terror, and the darkness had suddenly come to him and taken his hand and pointed up the hill. At the thought, he shouldered his skis and went on. Perfect love cast out fear, he murmured to himself over and over again. It was true, too. He had stopped feeling so terribly frightened because he had stopped feeling alone. He had reached the top of the forest and come out into the open, and now he could think of nothing at all except of how to go on. The wind struck him an icy blow, and he went straight into the new soft fall, right up to his knees. He struggled out with difficulty, backed under the trees, and buckled on his skis. Then, bent nearly double, because the pain of the cold wind on his face was more than he could bear, he struggled on, foot by foot. Mercifully, it had stopped snowing, and the sky was less inky. Now and again, the pale moon broke through the ragged mass of hurrying clouds, and at such moments, if he lifted his face for an instant, he could see rocks rising to his side, and knew that if he just went on straight in front of him, he must reach the top sometime. And then, after what seemed a very long time, he was struck by a blast that sent him reeling backward, and he lay gasping in the snow. I shall never be able to get up again, said Lucien to himself, almost too exhausted to care whether he ever got up again or not. And then once again he remembered about that perfect love. And because he was young, and because he felt the Savior so close beside him, instead of praying, he just held out his hands to be lifted. And after a moment or two, a little strength seemed to come back to him, and he struggled to his feet again and found that the ground in front of him sloped gently downward. He had crossed the pass. Now he became thankful for the wind, because his legs were too weary and numb to steer his skis, and without that gale sweeping up the pass against him, he would have gone dangerously fast. As it was, he traveled slowly, crouching for a little way, and then his legs crumpled up altogether, and he sat down and let the skis carry him like a toboggan. He was so cold that he had stopped feeling cold. Sitting there, sliding effortlessly down the hill, he wondered if he were going to sleep. A sort of drowsy numbness seemed to be stealing over him until suddenly he felt a jerk, and coming to, he realized that the wind was no longer buffeting him, and his skis had stuck in a drift. He gave himself a shake and looked around. He had reached the forest again, and that was why the wind had dropped. He could not remember anything of the last few minutes. For all he knew, he might have been the last few hours, but apparently the Lord, in his perfect love, had guided him. For the smooth forest track lay at his feet, winding away through the trees, and he had not missed the way. He roused himself, for it was very dark, and the storm lantern gave light only a few feet ahead. He must steer himself carefully because the path zigzagged, and he might fall over the edge and run into the tree trunks. But he was sheltered from the wind, which had beaten the sense and feeling all out of him. And that, for the moment, was all he cared about. He was beginning to feel that his limbs belonged to him again, and they were very painful. Down, down, down. The forest was almost quiet now, for he was traveling toward a deep valley. Sometimes he stood, sometimes he sat, and towards early morning the clouds dispersed, and the moon shone out, and its light pierced the boughs. When at last he glided out into the open, the fields lay still and silvery, and the dark town was below him. In half an hour's time he would be there, knocking on the door of the great hotel. And then, if Jesus really loves me perfectly, thought Lucian, he can't have let me come all this way for nothing, and too weary to think any more, he struck out across the meadow. That was the end of chapter 1. This is Grandma Carla. Chapter 21. This is Grandma Carla, and I love you.